Red Natura 2000 forms part of the European Network of Protected Areas, a network of core sites of tremendous ecological value. The network was set up to guarantee the conservation of natural habitats and species of flora and fauna in their natural areas of distribution, by means of designating different zones or areas for the protection and conservation. In the Basque Country, 55 of these aforementioned areas are included in the Red Natura 2000 network, and their surface area represents some 20% of the total area of our autonomous community. The network also strengthens bonds between people and nature. Not only is the scheme the main conservation instrument for biodiversity in the European Union, but it also represents the opportunity to foster and encourage sustainable development between human populations living within the network itself, and strives to achieve the balance between socio-economic activities and nature by improving the quality of life of the people living in these areas. Red Natura 2000 is already revealing itself as an important motor for many local economies, thanks to both traditional and other recently created activities. Many consider woods and forests as being some of the richest ecosystems on the planet, since they're the natural habitats for a vast number of animals and plants. In addition to which, they are also important regulators of water flow. They conserve the soil and its capacity to store carbon and help make climates more benign, all of which are vitally important when it comes to combating climate change and our having to adapt to its adverse effects. At the same time, they provide us with uncountable environmental services, economic resources such as timber, wild fruits and berries, and are also attractive spots in which to carry out leisure activities and tourism. Approximately 1/4 of all European natural woods and forests are protected by the Red Natura 2000 network, and in the Basque Country, 65% of this protected area comprises woods and forests declared to be of European interest. But despite their astounding biodiversity and number, many animals in our woods simply cannot be easily seen. Some because they're nocturnal, others because they live half hidden by the fallen leaves and vegetation on the forest floor. Such as this collared grass snake, which, despite being a great predator of amphibians and other small invertebrates, can in turn also be the menu for this pair of European grass snakes that have installed their nest at the heart of a holm oak. The European short-toed eagle is one of the more interesting migratory raptors to visit a few of our drier areas. It feeds almost exclusively off reptiles, particularly grass snakes, which makes it an excellent controller of grass snake population. Here, a young short-toed eagle carefully observes its parents' behavior. It must learn how to pull the grass snake out of its mother's beak tail first if it wants to eat and live long enough to grow into an adult. This is the Iski Natural Park in the historical territory of Alava. Its Pyrenean oak forest is one of the best conserved in Europe. This forest is home to one of the few colonies of middle-spotted woodpeckers in the Iberian Peninsula. Given the forest's excellent state of conservation, it provides them with shelter and a varied diet based on insects complemented with seeds and acorns. It's mating time in the Pyrenean oak forest. This pair of woodpeckers has chosen the same old tree in which to build their nest, just as they've done for the past few years. Before mating, they first fatten themselves up for just over 20 days, by eating a combination of insects and ivy seeds. Those couples that start to mate before the mating season gets fully underway eat a higher proportion of ivy seeds. Nothing ever goes to waste in woods and forests. While a pine marten is patrolling its territory, this yellow-necked field mouse is gathering all the acorns it can to help it survive the harsh winter months ahead. Rodents are the normal prey of martens. With their highly developed senses, martens can detect even the slightest quiver of a field mouse's whisker. The field mouse realizes it's far too exposed and gathers as many acorns as rapidly as it possibly can before transporting them to a safer spot. The coast is the connecting strip between land and sea. It's an unstable, constantly changing place buffeted by climate, wind, waves, tides, and biological and human activity. These continuous changes in coastal areas condition and modify the forms of life that live there, forcing them to develop a higher capacity for adjustment than those living in other ecosystems. The Basque coastline is some 190 kilometers long. It has an irregular profile, with high cliffs and numerous small bays and coves, interspersed with a few river mouths and beaches open to the sea. In addition to accommodating great biodiversity, our coast also serves a fair percentage of the population as a place where they can carry out their economic and leisure activities, which is exactly why we must implement protective steps, such as those promoted by Red Natura 2000. Tufted cormorants or shags dwell on some of the most inaccessible cliffs along our coastline. These marine birds live in colonies and build their nests on ledges protected from the bad weather. Their chicks, now independent after having been fed in the nest for roughly 50 days, search for the best spots from which to fish. This one here picks its way between the pools left behind at low tide at the outlet of the Urdaibai River. Taking full advantage of its sturdy legs and webbed feet, it leaves no stone unturned in its search for food. However, catching something to eat is sometimes not as easy as it looks. But persistence has its rewards, and it catches a slippery common sea slug. It starts by swallowing the fish head first to stop its sharp spines from lodging in its throat. nature is sometimes capricious. And in certain spots on cliffs along our coastline, we can see a plant that's quite unique. The Armeria euskadiensis, or Basque thrift. This uniqueness makes this plant incredibly special. Like the beautiful tree mallow, more commonly found on cliff ledges fertilized by the excrement of marine birds. Its colorful flowers attract numerous pollinating insects that play their essential roles in terrestrial ecosystems. Intertidal ecosystems are continuously affected by the action of tides and waves. These areas are home to numerous living beings that have adapted themselves perfectly to the ever-fluctuating changes to their habitat. And here the common octopus is king. The octopus is a master of camouflage and an intelligent and extremely specialized predator of mollusks and crustaceans. Just 5 centimeters long, this young cuttlefish keeps a watchful eye open on the octopus's movements. Though it too is an extraordinary predator, it's time to make use of its talent for mimetics and bury itself in the sand in order to go unnoticed. Far better to disappear completely when faced with such a lethal predator. Inland wetlands are another kind of areas included in the Basque Country's Red Natura 2000 conservation scheme. Wetlands play an important role in hydrological processes, and thanks to their greater natural riches, are considered one of the most productive ecosystems. They provide us with environmental services of tremendous importance. They act, for example, as water filterers. They contribute to subterranean water deposits. They're capable of retaining a vast amount of water, thereby reducing the impact of flooding, and, in addition to everything else, they help us reduce the rate of climate change. At the same time, however, they are also the planet's most fragile ecosystems. Historically speaking, wetlands, bogs and marshes have always been held in very low esteem because people thought they were unproductive and insalubrious. In our towns and cities in the past, people traditionally dried them out and reclaimed them for agricultural, urban and industrial use. For this reason, the Basque Country's most important inland wetlands have been included not only in the Red Natura 2000 scheme, but in the Ramsar Agreement regarding internationally important wetlands. Some wetlands, such as the lagoons in La Guardia, the Salburua wetlands, and Yuso and Nareos Caicedo Lake, are natural in origin. Others, however, are artificial, such as the Zadorra reservoirs, which are the main source of drinking water for most Basque inhabitants. Given their geographic location and peculiar characteristics, wetlands are extremely important areas, not only for autochthonous fauna, but also wildlife flocking here from other areas, in their search for somewhere where they can spend the winter, breed and nest. Small numbers of purple herons, with their predilection for wet areas with vegetation, visit our inland wetlands to nest. They silently patrol the wetlands in search of prey. And, when they catch sight of a possible treat, they approach slowly and carefully until they are within striking distance. We're amazed at the almost disproportionate thickness and length of a heron's legs, and the grace with which it moves. This time, the heron catches a tasty crab that certainly won't be enough to satisfy its hunger. All species play their part in nature. Water masses in our inland wetlands are fundamental for species which need them to complete their life cycles, thus fulfilling the role they play in these natural environments. Mosquitoes need the still water found in wetlands. Mosquitoes form an essential part of environmental aquatic trophic chains because they're the principal food source for many other species. Out of sight, underwater, the food chain goes on and on. Believe it or not, this dragonfly nymph that can stay in its aquatic phase for up to 3 years also benefits from the presence of mosquitoes. Dragonflies undergo a spectacular metamorphosis when they go from their aquatic to their terrestrial phase. But in order to do this, they must first shed the skin they've been using for their entire lives underwater. This amazing transformation usually takes place at night, thus greatly reducing the number of possible predators. Once metamorphosis is complete, they emerge as adults. When dawn breaks, they'll be ready to feed and mate, thus completing their life cycle. Rivers are often considered as being the Earth's arteries, since they carry out the essential functions necessary to guarantee life on Earth. Rivers play a particularly important role in the water cycle process, collecting water from the ground and transporting it to seas and oceans. Rivers are corridors of life, linking water basins to the seas and atmosphere. Rivers are complex, diverse ecosystems that carry out their essential function as ecological corridors. Wherever they meander, rivers and streams not only provide the also necessary fresh water for wildlife, but also contour the countryside. Were we to follow the rivers that make up our 2 main hydrographical systems, we'd soon notice the overgrown protective riverbank woods and thickets, made up of fast-growing, short-lived species that can thrive in sodden soil, such as ash trees, alders and willows. This riverside foliage regulates the river's microclimate, contributes to the stability of riverbanks, mitigates the effects of flooding, and stops sediments from getting into the rivers themselves. Work currently being carried out to recover this kind of protective foliage is progressing steadily. If we showed more respect for our water systems, we'd have increasingly richer and more diverse areas, and we'd see species, such as this European otter, that will gradually return to places from which they've disappeared almost entirely today. All species that live on or in our rivers rely on them being in a state of optimum conservation. Luckily, there are still some healthy stretches of river that allow birds such as the aquatic blackbird to exist. These blackbirds frequently build their nests behind waterfalls, safely tucked away out of sight of predators, even though it complicates their access to the nest, especially when the river is carrying more water than usual. Nests with easier access means they are also more exposed. This jay is having a bath in a pool belonging to a couple of blackbirds. The couple's continuous comings and goings to and from a specific spot on an old bridge tell him their chicks have hatched. Nothing can save them now. Their death is inevitable. In nature, one animal's death usually means the survival of another. The morphology, state of conservation, and difference in water levels of our rivers make a huge difference between the presence or absence of certain species, such as these mottled newts. The male searches for the best, stillest pool on the bend of a river before starting his aquatic and therefore reproductive phase. He's ready to mate, as can be seen by the striking dorsal crest running the length of his body. Here he awaits the arrival of females. Such as this one here. She is clearly identifiable by her lack of crest during the reproductive cycle. After courting and mating, she will start sticking her tiny eggs one by one to the leaves of plants beside the pool. At first, eggs measure just 2 millimeters in diameter and are covered by a gelatinous film that keeps them completely hydrated. Weeks go by, and roughly 1 month after being laid, the 1 centimeter long larva that emerges is already sufficiently developed to abandon its protective jelly-like covering and begin its aquatic phase of life. This larval stage ends when it's between 4 and 7 centimeters long. Estuaries form at the mouths of rivers, where they flow into the sea. And tides mix salt water and fresh, thus forming one of the most productive ecosystems of all. Tidal dynamics cause important changes in the salinity levels of the water, which, combined with the processes of erosion and sedimentation, generate a tremendous diversity of habitats and environments. Estuaries in Euskadi play fundamental roles along bird migration routes, since the birds use them primarily as spaces for resting and feeding on their journey, and as sanctuaries where they can spend the winter. One clear example is spoonbills. This is one of the spoonbill breeding colonies found in the Frisian Islands in the North Sea. Once the chicks are sufficiently developed, They will begin a gradual migration some 3,500 kilometers long that will take them to the coasts of Mauritania, where they will spend the winter. It's during migration when our wetlands become absolutely vital for them. Migrating spoonbills are an excellent indicator of the quality of the water in our estuaries, since they only feed and rest when they find acceptable water conditions. They feed in shallow water, moving their heads from side to side and using their extremely long sensitive beaks to catch shrimps, fish and crabs. Once they have eaten and rested, they'll continue their flight to Africa, from where they will return once again to their nesting and breeding spots in Europe once winter is over. One of the Basque Country's outstanding characteristics is its mountains. The desire to climb them, their natural wealth, and their myths and traditions have made our mountains one of the most appealing attractions for visitors. Morphologically speaking, Basque mountains can be split into two quite different ranges. To the north we have the Atlantic Range with its mild oceanic climate that colours the landscape green, whereas to the south we have the somewhat drier Mediterranean Range with its more extreme temperatures. Both ranges are much appreciated by hill walkers, climbers, excursionists, and people in general who love practicing outdoor sports, as well as by nature lovers who give free rein to their hobbies of observing the flora and fauna found in these regions. The extensive livestock farming carried out on our mountains also plays a fundamental role, since it's extremely important for our economy, and also generates a type of mountain meadow and field that hosts tremendous biodiversity. Given their close link to livestock farming, we can frequently observe three different species of carrion-eating raptors. The griffon vulture and the Egyptian vulture are the two species that mainly dispose of the corpses of animals in our mountains, thus preventing the spread of disease. Whereas the presence of bearded vultures, which eat only the bones of dead animals, is only testimonial. This is the female of the only pair of bearded vultures living in our mountains. The couple have been together for several years now, but they've never had any success mating. Red kites are frequently seen alongside other carrion eaters, and disputes often break out as they try to grab pieces of food they'll frequently eat on the wing. As they devour the meat, they'll scatter the small bones they can't eat over the countryside. And that's something no self-respecting bearded vulture misses. Though they themselves sometimes drop bones from a height to shatter them, they certainly won't say no to the bone splinters scattered by the kites. Under the watchful eyes of the griffon vultures, our female cautiously approaches a small bone and quickly swallows it. Apart from the carrion eaters, there's a tremendous variety of species, both flora and fauna, all of which have adapted themselves perfectly to living on the rocky outcrops so characteristic of our mountains. We've got wall creepers, for example. These small insect-eating birds that like to live on steep cliffs can be seen in the Basque Country during winter months. They move in short little hops that remind us of the erratic flight of large butterflies as they spring from crack to crack on the steep rock faces in their search for insects. Ornithologists love to see them because they're so difficult to observe, given the inaccessibility of the places where they're usually found. Several caves can be seen along the rocky outcrops. Some, such as the Pothalagua cave, are admired for their sheer beauty, whereas others are famous for providing shelter for different species of bats. The bats that live in Euskadi are insectivorous and perfectly capable of devouring vast amounts of insects every single night. This is why they're so important when it comes to controlling plagues, and why bats are so beneficial for agriculture. Our mountains are also home to some of the best conserved woods and forests in Europe. They're incredibly old, and have scarcely ever been touched. Their ancient, sometimes dead trees provide a huge variety of microhabitats, perfect for the many insects that depend upon their wood. Insects play a decisive role in forest ecosystems, since they facilitate decomposition and the recycling of vegetable matter, in addition to fertilizing the soil. Beech forests are another good example. Rosalia longicorn beetles, which live mainly in beech forests, begin their frenetic activity in the summer months. Males search for females to mate with. But to do so, they'll first have to fight other males. The outcome of their short but very fierce battles is determined by the sheer size of each individual. They fight by lifting their rivals into the air with their powerful pincers and throwing them off the tree trunk. After the skirmishes, mating occurs, and females deposit their fertilized eggs in the cracks of old tree trunks, sometimes even with the males still on their backs. Euskadi is a small but densely populated region, something that makes it extremely vulnerable to the pressure we humans exert on the environment. Historically speaking, despite their being important providers of numerous resources of great economic and social value, Basque ecosystems were never given the protection they so deserved. Population growth and the whims of industrial development altered our surroundings that affected to a greater or lesser degree the quality of the water in our rivers, estuaries and coastal areas, as well as the area it occupied. Autochthonous forests were affected by industry's need for timber, and mountains provided us with the minerals and limestone we needed for building. We're still in time, however, to implement recovery strategies that will allow us to slowly repair the damage caused to our natural surroundings, and above all, conserve those regions that still contain a high percentage of their original biodiversity. In order to reverse the current situation as much as possible, the Basque government and other administrations have dedicated, and are continuing to dedicate, great effort towards restoring affected areas, thus protecting the most valuable and fragile of our surroundings. This is precisely why the best conserved ecosystems in our land are now being protected by Red Natura 2000, the largest European network for protected natural areas, and the European Union's principal conservation tool. We need to keep our natural areas in good order, not only because of the need to prioritize the conservation of several endangered species and their habitats and restore order and ecological balance, but also for the goods and services they provide our society. Having a healthy number of our ecosystems included in this European network for protected areas, together with our dedicating serious effort into conserving and improving the way they function, means we must work together in order to ensure our future well-being and improve our quality of life.